You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium, available on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean and most other podcast platforms. This episode is about the Hermann House Poltergeist. So it's over to you now, Mark.
On the 3rd of February 1958, in Seaford, Long Island, New York, James Hermann came home one day to his family, who all started to tell him about some strange things that had happened around the house that particular day. James Hermann's wife, Lucille, said that after their children came home from school, they couldn't help but hear strange popping noises that were coming from different areas around the home. But not only that, when she and the children went to investigate the noises, they found, very much to their surprise, several household substances that were in bottles that had been uncapped and the containers placed upside down. The bottles themselves only included things like shampoo and bleach, but not only were they found to be placed upside down, but they were found to be hot to the touch. And considering that the bottles were all screw-top varieties, it makes the fact that they were all uncapped all the more puzzling. And what was even more bewildering than that, or disturbing, depending on your personal point of view, of course, is that there was also a bottle of holy water that had been spilled on the dresser. More strange phenomena continued to happen throughout the home, and explanations like the house was deteriorating due to age, or that the family were playing pranks, were explored at the time, but were later ruled out. So common did the disturbances become that the Hermann household later nicknamed this energy, or force, Popper the Poltergeist. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in once again and listening to this furniture-moving, bottle-popping episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a psychic medium, a ufologist and a paranormal investigator. And just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every Monday night I do a podcast on the various subjects under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters and all sorts of paranormal phenomena, including things like true crime, unsolved crime and missing people. So, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any other of the podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the strange stories surrounding the Hermann House Poltergeist. And this week's necessary disclaimer: this story is basically a ghost story, so don't forget to check under your beds tonight before going to sleep. But having said that, I do touch on a teenage murder and a young girl dying of a terminal illness. So, as with all my shows, you listen at your own discretion, with all opinions and comments being strictly my own, and the facts of the case remaining. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, it will never turn invisible and throw things around just for the sake of it. So, back we go to tonight's story. According to Wikipedia, Seaford, where the Hermann family lived, is a census-designated place in the town of Hempstead, Nassau County on the south shore of Long Island in New York in the United States, with the population, as of the 2020 census, being reported as 15,251. The original settlers of Seaford were called the Marapeakus, I think that's right, Marapeaks, who were a Native American Indian tribe who themselves first called the area Great Water Land. During the 19th century, due to the creation of the Long Island Railroad, villages across Long Island started to grow in size. European settlements to the area began with the arrival of Captain John Seaman, who was actually a native of Seaford, East Sussex, in England. And after obtaining the patent for the area, Seaford was the first European name given to the town, which was also widely referred to as Seaman's Neck. And during this time, Seaford remained an agriculturally developed area. Over time, the town gained a post office, a church, and a one-room school, which in time established itself in what would many years later become the first firehouse, and today serves as the home of the Seaford Historical Museum. And with the creation of the Sunrise Highway in 1929, Seaford started to see a large influx of new inhabitants. The Hermann household consisted of the father, James Hermann, his wife, Lucille Hermann, and of course, just to confuse things a little, the two children who were also called James and Lucille Hermann. Lucille, the daughter, being 13 years of age, and James, the son, being 12. To make things a little simpler just for this podcast, when referring to the adults of the family, I will simply call them James and Lucille Senior, and the children I will call James and Lucille, you guessed it, Junior. So, to give you a quick recap from the beginning of the episode, if you remember, it is the 3rd of February 1958, and James Hermann Sr. has just come home from work to find his wife, Lucille Hermann Sr., telling him about some of the strange things that she and their two children had been hearing around the house that day, i.e. the weird popping noises coming from different areas around the home. And if you remember, when the family found that it was bottles of bleach and shampoo, etc., that had popped, not only were the bottles found placed upside down and hot to the touch, but all the bottles were in fact screw tops, which made the fact that they were all uncapped all the more puzzling. James Hermann Sr., being somewhat sceptical of the whole thing, figured the popping must be the result of some bizarre chemical reaction, or that some prankster had got inside their house and tried to spook his family. So he advised his wife and two children to stay calm and to keep these occurrences to themselves. He believed that it was important for him to keep things under some sort of control. However, a few days later, the popping noises started again, but this time James Hermann Sr. witnessed the phenomena for himself. He watched in horror as bottles started to move around in his bathroom as if they were being lifted by some unseen force. So he did what anybody would have probably done in this situation back in the late 50s. He called the police. Remember, guys, that this was the late 50s, so the term Ghostbuster wasn't really available in your common or garden English dictionary or encyclopedia. Surprisingly enough, the police were also perplexed at the bottle-popping phenomena, as they too couldn't explain the strange event that was happening before their very eyes. The police performed a series of tests to rule out any radio transmissions or electrical disturbances, but all were to no avail. Whatever was happening to the bottles could not be explained with any logic, and as time went by the incidents became more violent, with ornaments and figures being smashed along with bookcases, randomly falling over. It was at this point that the Hermann family suspected that they had a poltergeist in their home. So, on the 17th of February, James and Lucille Hermann Sr., being devout Catholics, decided that they would call in a priest to bless the home and get rid of any, what they felt were, harmful spirits. After this first short break, in part 2, we will look at what happened when the Hermann Poltergeist story went to the press and some of the findings from the parapsychologists.
This show is brought to you courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for guided tours of the haunted rooms at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times, and over 16s only, please, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could and has taken place at any time. Some areas and particular objects or items can be quite scary and unnerving. Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective offers. And why not download the app, available on both iOS and Android, for only $3.99, to keep up to date with what is coming up at the centre.
Thanks for listening to Mark's Unexplained World. If you are interested in parapsychology, quantum sciences, and true encounters with the other side, you may wish to visit The Weird Walk Home. That's my show on YouTube. Also, stay tuned, because After Dark with Tilly and Mark is creeping your way in June. Additionally, if you are interested in weird sciences, you may like to purchase my brand new book on Amazon. That would be Weird Time by Tim R. Swartz. It features lots of strange explanations and encounters with time from myself and other notable names like Lon Strickler and more. Thanks for listening.
News of the Hermann House poltergeist spread like the warm organs from a body on a hot operating table and ended up being the subject of an article in Life magazine, with the headline reading, and I quote,
House of Flying Objects.
And the headline reading, and again I quote,
A ghostly mystery plagues a family and baffles the experts.
Some people even wrote to the Hermann family, by letter of course, no email or text messaging back then, offering potential or reasonable explanations for the phenomena, while other people believed that the strange activity around their home must be the result of a poltergeist, or more accurately, poltergeist activity. On a short but probably well known. Interesting side note, in German folklore and other ghost lore, a poltergeist, which is the German word for rumbling ghost or noisy spirit, is a type of ghost or spirit that is responsible for any physical disturbances such as loud noises and objects being moved around or even destroyed. Most claims or fictional descriptions of poltergeists show them as being capable of pinching, biting, hitting and tripping people up. They also depict as being capable of moving or levitating or of various objects such as furniture and cutlery, or making noises such as knocking on walls or doors. Foul smells are also associated with poltergeist occurrences, as well as spontaneous fires and different electrical issues in the home, particularly flickering lights. These manifestations have been recorded in many different cultures and countries, including Brazil, Australia, the United States, Japan and most of the European nations, with the first recorded cases of poltergeist activity dating back to the 1st century. Whatever the case was at the Hermann household, the activity continued to occur, with not just the family but police officers as well continuing to witness the moving of objects and other strange phenomena around the home. I suppose one of the unusual things regarding the Hermann haunting was that it wasn't a typical looking haunted house, not like, say, an old castle or an old pub or mansion home. It was just a modern day, 1950s, suburban model home that was purchased when brand new in 1953. And as this chapter in the home's life is in 1958, this means that the house was only 5 years old at the time. And as it was originally purchased by the Hermanns, they were the only people to have ever lived there. So as a result, there was nothing to indicate any unfinished business from a previous spirit connected to any previous tenant. So why did the Hermann House poltergeist look and feel like a traditional haunting? Well, it is at this point that Dr. J.B. Rhine enters our story in the hope of finding some of the answers to these questions. Dr. J.B. Rhine, who was born on the 29th of September 1895 and was also known as Joseph Banks Rhine, was an American botanist who founded parapsychology as an actual branch of psychology. He also founded the Parapsychology Lab at the Duke University, the Journal of Parapsychology, which was the foundation for research on the nature of man, and the Parapsychological Association. Dr. J.B. Rhine wrote the book Extrasensory Perception and Parapsychology, Frontier Science of the Mind. J.B. Rhine began the studies that helped develop parapsychology into a branch of science and looked at parapsychology as a branch of abnormal psychology. He sadly passed away on the 20th of February 1980 at the ripe old age of 84. Dr. J.B. Rhine approached the Hermann family after they had to endure about a month's worth of continuous poltergeist madness in their home. He believed that the presence of the Hermann teenage children, meaning James and Lucille Jr., of course, may be the reason for the poltergeist activity. It's worth pointing out here that adolescents are usually present in the home or surrounding area where poltergeist activity is taking place, with a tendency to mainly focus on children and teenagers, particularly going through puberty. It is thought by many parapsychologists to be one of the stranger aspects of poltergeist phenomena. Having said that, It has also been known that people who lead very troubled or stressed lives, although not as often, can likewise be the agent for a poltergeist. Dr. J.B. Rhine also brought some of his colleagues to the Hermann home, and together they studied the phenomena, interviewed the family, and recorded some of these strange happenings. One of the colleagues was J.B. Rhine. I'll do that one again. One of the colleagues that J.B. Rhine brought with him was American psychologist and parapsychologist William G. Roll. William G. Roll, who was born on the 3rd of July 1926, as well as being an American psychologist, was also a parapsychologist on the faculty of the psychology department at the University of West Georgia in Carlton, Georgia. He is probably best notable for his belief in poltergeist activity by coining the term recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or RSPK for short, in order to explain poltergeist cases. However, RSPK was never accepted by mainstream science, and skeptics have described William G. Roll as a credulous investigator. He eventually passed away on the 9th of January in 2012, aged 86. William G. Roll investigated, along with another parapsychologist named Joseph Gator Pratt, the Hermann Poltergeist case, and suggested although some of the phenomena could well have been pranks carried out by Hermann's 12-year-old son James Hermann Jr., he strongly felt that some of the events were actually the results of the before-mentioned recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or RSPK. However, as I mentioned earlier, this reasoning was never accepted by mainstream science, claiming that there is no evidence at the time that RSPK even exists. Shortly after the arrival of Dr. J.B. Rhine and his crew of Ghostbusters, the poltergeist activity at the Hermann home ceased. All in all, between the dates of the 3rd of February to the 10th of March 1958, there were about 70 documented reports of strange and unusual activities recorded within the house. So do bear in mind that, unlike most other poltergeist cases that seem to go on from 6 months to over a year, all of this only happened over a 5-week period, which would probably explain why I can't seem to find out much about what actually happened to the Hermann family within the house itself. But there is no shortage of information on the parapsychologists that went to investigate the phenomena. The Hermann House poltergeist case was later re-evaluated by the well-known skeptic Joe Nickell. On an interesting side note, Joe Nickell is an American skeptic, investigator of the paranormal, senior research fellow for the Committee for the Skeptical Inquiry, and is an author and editor of over 30 books. Probably one of the biggest career highlights was when he helped to expose the James Maybrick Jack the Ripper diary as a hoax in 2002. Joe Nickell concluded that all the Hermann House poltergeist phenomena could... Joe Nickell concluded that all the Hermann House poltergeist phenomena could easily be explained by deliberate trickery from Hermann's son, James Hermann Jr. Also, according to Joe Nickell, both parapsychologists who investigated the Hermann's home, meaning Joseph Gator Pratt and William G. Roll, were rather credulous and had little understanding of magic trickery. Joe Nickell concluded that, and I quote, Taken as a whole, the evidence strongly points to 12-year-old James Hermann Jr. as having been the deliberate cause of the Seaford poltergeist outbreak. He continues, and again I quote, "The motive, means and opportunity were his, and the case was unwittingly prolonged by the credulousness of else." After this second short break, in part 3, we will look at how the Hermann House poltergeist influenced the 1982 Poltergeist movie, a closer look at the curse of the 1982 movie, and a brief look on how Lucy Hermann, the daughter, looks at her own feelings today regarding what happened to her family back then.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk. Or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
Okay, so from what I can gather, the Hermann Poltergeist case was the main influence for the 1982 Steven Spielberg-produced horror movie, Poltergeist. Alrighty, so let's take a look at some of the similarities. Both were a modern-day domesticated family set in a modern-day domesticated housing estate, apart from the date, of course, the first in 1958 as opposed to the second in 1982. And when the going got tough, meaning that pop of the poltergeist was in full throttle, both families did reach out to a group of parapsychologists. And although there were very few results or conclusions between the parapsychologists, both families did find a kind of divinity help, meaning that the Hermann family brought in their Catholic priest, and the Freeling family, from the movie, brought in a psychic medium to help cleanse the home of the furniture-moving spirits. And as I can't seem to find much as to what exactly happened to the Hermann family in their home over the course of the 4 to 5 weeks of Pop of the Poltergeist's antics, apart from the exploding bottles, that is, it is difficult to know if there are any more similarities between the two cases. But having said that, I can't imagine one of the parapsychologists pulling his face apart after seeing an uncooked steak macheteing its way across the kitchen counter. Nor can I see one of the Hermann children being sucked in by a tree through their bedroom window, or intimidated by a toy clown. Well, maybe the clown thing. Also included in the film are physical apparitions, extending hallways, Native American burial grounds, skull-popping portals, and a swimming pool filled with poorly dressed skeletons. Obviously, the 1982 Poltergeist movie is more sensationalised than this story of the Hermann family Popper the Poltergeist case. I'll tell you what, for those who haven't seen the 1982 Poltergeist movie, here's a very short synopsis. The Freelings are a typical suburban family. Husband Steve Freeling sells real estate in their ever-expanding subdivision, and his wife Diane Freeling is a stay-at-home mum caring for their 3 kids, Dana, Robbie and little Carol Ann. After a short time, strange things begin to happen around the house. Things like cupboard doors opening on their own, furniture rearranging itself, and chairs starting to slide across the kitchen floor. It starts off as a bit of a novelty at first, but things soon start to become darker when the youngest child, Carol Ann, vanishes into a nether world where, strangely, she can only be communicated with through the white noise on their television set. The good old days of old analogue signal, eh? A team of paranormal investigators move into the house to investigate, but the forces that kidnap young Carol Ann are evil and powerful, requiring the services of a psychic medium called Tangina, a woman who has dealt with this type of situation before. Well, I don't want to ruin the ending for you in case some of you haven't seen it, and still want to. The Poltergeist movie of 1982 was also said to be cursed. Some of its stars, namely Dominic Dunne and Heather O'Rourke, both passed away when they were very young. Dominic Dunne, who played the eldest daughter, Dana Freeling, was strangled by her ex-boyfriend John Thomas Sweeney on the 30th of October 1982 during an argument on the driveway of her West Hollywood home. And due to this strangulation, she later fell into a coma and then died 5 days later on the 4th of November 1982. In a court case that gained significant media coverage at the time, her ex-boyfriend, John Thomas Sweeney, was convicted of voluntary manslaughter in Dominic Dunne's death and served 3.5 years behind bars. And Heather O'Rourke, who played the youngest daughter, Carol Ann Freeling, became ill in 1987 with a parasitic disease called giardiasis. Giardiasis, thank you. Which she contracted from contaminated well water at her family home in Big Bear Lake in California. She was subsequently diagnosed as having Crohn's disease, which is a type of inflammatory bowel, and because of this, she was prescribed cortisone injections to treat the illness during the time she was filming the Poltergeist 3 movie in 1988. The steroidal injections, I think I got that one, resulted in the facial swelling of her cheeks, which, according to Heather O'Rourke's mother, she was very self-conscious about. On the 31st of January 1988, Heather O'Rourke began exhibiting flu-like symptoms, and the following morning she collapsed in her home and was rushed into the community hospital in Alcasian. En route, she suffered a cardiac arrest, but the paramedics were able to restart her heart, and she was subsequently flown to the Children's Hospital of San Diego, where it was discovered that she had intestinal stenosis and went straight into theatre for emergency surgery. She survived the surgery, but then suffered another cardiac arrest while in the recovery room, where doctors performed CPR for over 30 minutes. But at 12:43 that afternoon, on the 1st of February 1988, at the age of just 12 years old, Heather O'Rourke was pronounced dead, with her cause of death ruled as congenital stenosis of the intestine, complicated by septic shock. Daniel Hollander, who was the head of gastroenterology at the University of California Irving Medical Center, stated that Heather O'Rourke's death was distinctly unusual as she lacked any prior symptoms of the bowel defect. He also said, and I quote, "I would have expected a lot of digestive difficulties throughout her life, and not just to have developed a problem all of a sudden like she did." However, Dr. Hollander further stated that it was possible for congenital bowel narrowing to cause sudden death without symptoms if an infection caused the bowel to rupture. On the 5th of February 1988, a private funeral was held for Heather O'Rourke in Los Angeles, where she was entombed at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery. Anyway, getting back to the Hermann Poltergeist case. The Hermann family eventually moved away from their poltergeist home in Seaford, Long Island, New York, and years later the daughter, Lucille Hermann Jr., appeared in a documentary called Real Fear, The Truth Behind the Movies, which aired on the Chiller Network. The daughter, Lucille Hermann Jr., also told the HuffPost Weird News, when referring to the 1982 movie, that, and I quote,
"I never saw Poltergeist.
She continues, and I quote,
I felt I had my own nightmare."
She also said of the poltergeist events that happened to her and her family back in 1958, and again I quote,
"All of a sudden you would hear this loud noise like a popping bottle sound, and you would look around and find a bottle that was 12 feet away from where it was supposed to be, and all the contents were missing and the bottle was hot to the touch. It was a long way off from the day in February 1958 when small pieces of furniture and her brother's globe began flying around the house."
Although the Hermann house haunting caught the attention of many different paranormal investigators, none of them came to any conclusion about the poltergeist phenomena one way or another. And on just a last short but interesting side note, about 7 miles away from the Hermann home was another notorious haunted home, and that one was called Amateurville.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 112, we are going to be looking at the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. The Oklahoma Girl Scout murders took place on the morning of the 13th of June 1977 at Camp Scott in Mays County, Oklahoma, in the United States. The victims were 3 Girl Scouts between the ages of 8 and 10 who were raped and murdered. Their bodies were then left on a trail leading to the campsite showers about 150 yards from their tent. The case was classified as solved when Jean Leroy Hart, a local jail escapee with a history of violence and rape, was arrested. However, Hart was acquitted in the March of 1979 after a jury unanimously returned a verdict of not guilty. The case remains officially unsolved.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. As usual, pronunciations of all the names and the medical names and places were all mine. The actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes, Denise Poolar and Tilly Treadwell from the Weird Walk Home podcast. With special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley. And, of course, a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast. But if you know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I'll see what I can do. I will also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. This show and all its contents are covered by basic copyright of Mark the Medium.